It was Christmas Eve in the small, snow-draped town of Willow Creek, nestled deep in the heart of Vermont. The night was still, as if the world itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the holiday's sacred arrival. The old St. Augustine Church stood proudly at the center of the town square, its bell tower rising above the snow-covered rooftops like a sentinel watching over the slumbering town. Its stained glass windows glowed softly with the warm light of candles, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the fresh snow below. The townsfolk were bustling about earlier in the day, preparing for the midnight service that had been a tradition for generations. But now the streets were quiet, the world wrapped in an eerie silence, broken only by the faint howling of the wind through the bare branches of the trees. It should have been peaceful, the kind of silence that blankets a town on the cusp of Christmas. But there was something else. Something unsettling. Inside the church, Pastor Eli Hensley stood at the altar, making final adjustments to the nativity scene. At 65 years old, Pastor Eli was a cornerstone of the Willow Creek community, his silver hair and gentle demeanor a comfort to all who knew him. He hummed softly to himself, a hymn that drifted off into the cavernous sanctuary, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows along the pews. The scent of pine from the Christmas garlands mingled with the beeswax candles, creating an ambiance of serenity. But Eli couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had crept into his heart all day, a quiet, gnawing worry he couldn't name. Across town, little Emma Carmichael, just 8 years old, was sitting by the frosted window of her modest home. She pressed her hands and nose against the glass, watching the snowflakes dance under the moonlight. Emma was one of the church's most enthusiastic participants, always leading the children's choir with a voice so pure it felt like it was meant for angels. But tonight, she, too, felt an odd heaviness in her chest, as if the silence outside wasn't just quiet, but empty. "Mom," she whispered to her mother, who was setting out cookies for Santa, "why does it feel like the world is waiting for something?" Her mother, taken aback by the question, paused for a moment before replying softly, "Sometimes, honey, the night before Christmas feels like that. It's a special kind of silence, sacred and still." But Emma wasn't convinced. She felt it in her bones. Something wasn't right. As midnight approached, the church bells began to toll, their deep, resonant chime echoing across the town. Families bundled up in scarves and coats, clutching candles as they made their way through the snow toward St. Augustine's. The children giggled and skipped, their excitement palpable. The adults, though cheerful, couldn't help but glance nervously toward the dark woods surrounding the town. The uneasy quiet lingered, heavy like the clouds above. As the last of the congregation filed into the church, Pastor Eli greeted each with a warm smile, but his heart felt like it was carrying a weight he couldn't name. Something was coming, he thought, though he didn't know what. It was then that the first sign of the unexpected arrived. A cat. The animal appeared suddenly, slinking out of the shadows and into the light spilling from the church doors. It was a striking creature, a lithe black cat with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. It padded silently through the snow, its movements graceful and deliberate, as though it had been sent with purpose. The townsfolk murmured to each other in surprise. A cat at midnight on Christmas Eve was unusual, to say the least. "Whose cat is this?" the young woman whispered to her husband, who shrugged. The cat stopped just at the threshold of the church, its gaze fixed on Pastor Eli. It didn't hiss or meow, nor did it seem frightened by the crowd. Instead, it sat, its tail curling around its paws, watching and waiting. Eli stepped toward the animal, a curious yet cautious look on his face. "Well, aren't you a mysterious little thing?" he said softly, bending down to meet its golden gaze. The cat blinked slowly, as if acknowledging his words, then turned its head toward the dark woods beyond the churchyard. Its ears twitched, and it let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that sent a shiver down Eli's spine. "What's wrong, boy?" Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The cat turned back to him, its eyes narrowing as if to say, "Pay attention." Inside the church, the congregation had begun singing "O Holy Night," their voices rising in harmony, oblivious to the silent exchange outside. But Pastor Eli couldn't tear his eyes away from the cat. He felt a strange connection to the animal, as though it had come to warn him of something. And then it happened. A sound, a faint rustling from the woods. Eli froze, his breath catching in his throat. The cat stood abruptly, its fur bristling, its body tense like a coiled spring. Whatever peace the night had held was shattered in that moment, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The silent night of Christmas Eve was about to be anything but. The rustling sound from the woods grew louder, though it remained faint enough that only those closest to the church door, Pastor Eli and the mysterious black cat, noticed it. Eli strained his ears, his eyes scanning the dark forest that bordered the churchyard. The snow, thick and untouched, reflected the dim glow of the moon, but it did little to illuminate the shadows beyond the tree line. The cat's growl deepened, its body crouching low as though ready to pounce. Eli's heart raced as he instinctively stepped back toward the church's threshold, his mind racing to make sense of the moment. "Pastor?" came the gentle voice of Mary Harper, one of the congregation's elders, who had just stepped outside for a breath of air. Her voice startled him, and he turned sharply toward her. "Is everything all right?" Before Eli could answer, the rustling sound came again, closer this time. Mary's smile faltered, her gaze shifting to the woods. "What is that?" she whispered. The cat let out a sharp yowl that pierced the air, startling both Eli and Mary. It darted a few steps forward into the snow, its ears flattened and tail puffed like a bristling brush. The sound of its cry was unlike anything they'd ever heard, urgent and commanding, as though it were trying to speak in a language they couldn't understand. "Mary," Eli said firmly, his voice low but steady, "go back inside, quickly." Mary hesitated, her concern evident, but the tone of his voice left no room for argument. She nodded and hurried back into the church, closing the heavy wooden doors behind her. The sound of the choir singing inside, muffled but sweet, drifted faintly through the air. Eli turned back to the cat, which was now prowling forward, each movement precise and deliberate. Whatever was in the woods, the cat seemed to sense it, perhaps even see it. Eli's unease grew into outright fear, his pulse quickening as he took a hesitant step toward the church door, ready to retreat inside and lock it behind him. But then he saw it. Just beyond the tree line, where the shadows seemed to dance and shift with the wind, a figure emerged. At first, it was barely distinguishable from the darkness itself, a vague, hulking shape that moved unnaturally, its movements jerky and uneven, as though it were struggling against some unseen force. Eli froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure stepped forward into the faint moonlight, and its features became clearer, or rather, its lack of features. It was shrouded in what looked like tattered black fabric, its face obscured by a hood that seemed to swallow all light. Its presence was chilling, an oppressive weight that pressed down on Eli's chest. The cat hissed furiously, its back arched and claws digging into the snow. It stood its ground, a lone sentinel between the figure and the church. Eli found his voice, though it wavered with fear. "Who's there? This is sacred ground. You're not welcome here." The figure paused, tilting its head slightly as if considering his words. Then, without warning, it surged forward, moving with an unnatural speed that defied logic. Eli stumbled back, nearly losing his footing, but the cat leapt into action. With a feral snarl, the cat launched itself toward the figure. A blur of black fur and fury. It collided with the shadowy intruder, and the air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. The figure recoiled, a guttural sound, half scream, half growl, emanating from beneath its hood. Inside the church, the congregation continued singing, unaware of the battle unfolding just outside. Little Emma, however, felt the shift. She paused mid-note, her voice faltering as an inexplicable chill ran down her spine. "Emma?" her mother whispered, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," Emma replied, her voice trembling. "It feels cold, like something bad is happening." Back outside, the cat and the shadowy figure clashed again. The creature swiped at the cat with long, claw-like appendages that seemed to materialize from the folds of its tattered cloak. But the cat was quick, quicker than any normal animal should be. It dodged and darted, its movements a dance of precision and ferocity. Eli watched in stunned silence, his fear giving way to awe. This wasn't just a cat. It was something more, something greater than he could understand. It fought with a determination and courage that seemed almost divine, its golden eyes blazing like twin beacons in the dark. The figure let out another guttural roar, stumbling backward under the cat's relentless assault. Each swipe of its claws met empty air, the cat always one step ahead. Then, with a final bone-chilling wail, the shadowy intruder dissolved into the night, its form unraveling like smoke caught in the wind. The cat stood in the snow, its chest heaving, its fur bristling. Slowly it turned to look at Eli, its golden eyes meeting his once more. For a moment neither moved. Then, as if satisfied that the threat was gone, the cat padded back toward the church, its movements calm and purposeful. Eli sank to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He felt tears prick his eyes, though he couldn't say why. The cat brushed against his leg, its fur warm despite the cold. You saved us," Eli whispered, his voice trembling. The cat blinked slowly, then turned and walked into the church, leaving Eli alone in the snow. Inside, the congregation finished their hymn, the final notes echoing through the sanctuary. The church doors creaked open, and the cat slipped inside unnoticed, curling up near the altar as if it belonged there. But Eli knew. He knew this night was far from over. Pastor Eli remained on his knees in the snow, staring after the black cat as it disappeared into the warmth of the church. The world outside was quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of a Christmas Eve night. It was a silence that felt heavy, as though the air itself were bracing for something more. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. He didn't know what he'd just witnessed, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The shadowy figure that had dissolved into the night wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching, and Eli felt its malevolent presence lingering just beyond the edge of the woods. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped back into the church, closing the heavy wooden doors behind him. The warmth of the sanctuary enveloped him, and for a moment he was struck by the stark contrast between the light and music inside and the dark, oppressive force he had faced outside. The congregation was singing, "Hark, the herald angels sing," their voices joyful and full of hope, completely unaware of the danger that had come so close to their sacred space. But one person noticed Eli's disheveled state. Little Emma, standing near the front pew with her candle clutched in her hands, saw the fear etched into the pastor's face. Her wide, curious eyes followed him as he made his way down the aisle, his steps faltering as he approached the altar. The cat was there, curled up near the base of the nativity scene. Its golden eyes flicked open as Eli drew near, watching him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just a cat, and he knew that now. Eli knelt down, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you really?" The cat didn't respond, at least not in any way a human could understand. Instead, it stood and stretched, then walked to the nativity scene, pausing in front of the baby Jesus figurine. It sat down, curling its tail around its paws, and stared at Eli as if to say, "This is why I'm here." Eli felt a lump rise in his throat. The message was clear. The cat wasn't just protecting the church, it was guarding the very essence of Christmas itself, the love, hope, and light that the holiday represented. But the shadow wasn't gone. It had been driven back, yes, but not defeated. And Eli could feel it gathering strength, preparing to strike again. The thought sent a jolt of panic through him. He turned to the congregation, who were still singing, their faces aglow with the light of their candles. They had no idea how close they had come to danger, and Eli realized that he couldn't let them stay here, not while the shadow lingered. He stepped up to the altar, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. The singing trailed off, and all eyes turned to him. "My friends," he began, his voice steady but urgent, "I need you to trust me. There's something outside, something dark. I don't know what it is, but I do know it means us harm." Murmurs rippled through the congregation, confusion and fear spreading like wildfire. "Pastor, what are you talking about?" called a man from the back. "Are we in danger?" asked another, clutching his young daughter to his side. Eli held up his hands again, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I don't want to alarm you, but I believe it would be best if we all left the church and returned to our homes. I'll lock the doors and stay here to ensure everything is safe." A chorus of protests erupted, the congregation's voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern. "We can't just leave. What about the midnight service? This is our tradition." Emma's clear, high voice cut through the noise. "If Pastor Eli says it's dangerous, we should listen." The crowd quieted, turning to look at the young girl. Emma's small face was set with determination, her hands clutching her candle tightly. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the pastor. "I believe you," she said simply. Eli felt a surge of gratitude and guilt. He didn't want to frighten her, or anyone for that matter, but he couldn't ignore the danger. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly. Then, turning back to the crowd, he added, "Please, go home. Be with your families. I'll make sure everything is all right here." Reluctantly, the congregation began to gather their things, murmuring amongst themselves as they made their way to the doors. Eli watched them go, his heart heavy with the weight of his responsibility. As the last of the townsfolk filed out, Eli closed the doors and bolted them shut. He turned back to the sanctuary, now eerily quiet, save for the faint crackle of the candles. The cat was still by the nativity scene, its golden eyes watching him with an almost expectant look. "What now?" Eli asked, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to do." The cat stood and walked toward him, its movements deliberate and confident. It brushed against his leg, then turned and padded toward the side door that led to the churchyard. It stopped and looked back at him, waiting. Eli hesitated, fear clawing at his chest, but then he remembered the cat's bravery, the way it had faced the shadow without hesitation. If this animal, this guardian, could stand against the darkness, then so could he. Taking a deep breath, Eli followed the cat. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily now, the world blanketed in white. The woods were silent, but the oppressive feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The cat led him to the edge of the churchyard, its body tense and alert. Then, from the shadows, the figure emerged again. But this time, it wasn't alone. Two more shadowy forms stepped out of the woods, their movements as unnatural and unsettling as the first. They didn't pause this time. They advanced straight toward the church, their intentions clear. Eli felt his knees weaken, but the cat stepped forward, its golden eyes blazing like fire. It let out a deep, rumbling growl that echoed through the night, a sound filled with both warning and defiance. And then, something miraculous happened. The church bell began to toll, not by human hand, but as if some unseen force had set it in motion. The sound was deep and resonant, filling the air with a powerful vibration that seemed to push back against the encroaching darkness. The cat stood tall, its fur illuminated by the golden glow of the church windows, and Eli felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just a fight for the church, it was a battle for the light itself. The sound of the church bell reverberated through the snowy night, its deep toll shaking the very ground beneath Pastor Eli's feet. It was as if the ancient bell, silent for so many years except on special occasions, had awakened to the call of something greater, a signal that the church and all it stood for needed defending. The shadows that advanced from the woods faltered, their unnatural, jerky movements slowing as the bell's resonant chime filled the air. Eli felt his heart pound in his chest as he watched the three figures hesitate. The black cat standing in the middle of the churchyard with its golden eyes fixed on the approaching forms let out another low growl. It wasn't just a warning this time, it was a challenge. Suddenly, one of the shadowy figures let out a guttural roar, a sound that seemed to echo from a place of pure malice. It charged forward, its movements more aggressive now, its claw-like appendages reaching for the cat. The other two followed, their forms blending with the darkness, creating an almost tangible wave of malevolence that surged toward the church. Eli's breath caught in his throat. "God help us," he whispered, clutching the small wooden cross that hung around his neck. The cat, undaunted, leapt into action. With a speed and grace that defied the limits of any earthly creature, it launched itself at the first shadow. Its claws slashed through the dark figure, and for a brief moment, the shadow seemed to dissolve, as though the very light in the cat's golden eyes had pierced through its darkness. The shadow let out a piercing shriek and staggered back, its form flickering like a dying flame. But the other two figures were relentless. They circled the cat, their movements unnervingly coordinated, as if they were part of a single entity. One lashed out with its claw-like appendages, and the cat narrowly dodged, its movements so fluid it seemed to glide across the snow. Eli felt frozen, his instincts torn between running and staying to help. But what could he do? He was just a man, a simple pastor facing forces far beyond his understanding. Yet as he watched the cat fight with a courage that bordered on the divine, something stirred within him, a flicker of faith stronger than fear. "No," he said aloud, his voice trembling but firm. "This is our church, this is our home, and you will not take it." He stepped forward, his boots crunching through the snow, and raised the cross around his neck. The cat, as if sensing his resolve, paused for a fraction of a second to glance back at him. Its eyes met his, and in that moment, Eli felt a surge of strength, not his own, but something greater. The shadowy figures seemed to sit too. They turned their attention to Eli, their movements growing more erratic, more desperate, as though the light radiating from his newfound courage burned them. The cat seized the opportunity. With a powerful leap, it landed on the nearest shadow, its claws tearing through the darkness with precision and purpose. The figure let out a final, agonizing wail before dissolving into nothingness, its form scattered like ash on the wind. The last shadow hesitated, its faceless hood turning toward the church, as if contemplating retreat. But the tolling bell and the unwavering light of the cat's golden eyes left it no escape. The cat stepped forward, its posture calm but commanding, and the final shadow recoiled, shrinking under the weight of its gaze. Then, with one final leap, the cat struck. Its claws tore through the darkness, and the figure collapsed into itself, vanishing into the cold night air. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady toll of the bell and the soft sound of snow falling. Eli sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The weight of what had just transpired, of what had almost been lost, overwhelmed him. He looked toward the cat, which stood in the center of the churchyard, its fur dusted with snow, its golden eyes reflecting the soft glow of the church windows. "You did it," Eli whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us. You saved all of us." The cat padded toward him, its movements calm and deliberate, as if it hadn't just faced down forces of pure darkness. It stopped in front of him and sat, staring at him with a gaze so deep and knowing that Eli felt as though it could see straight into his soul. "Thank you," Eli said, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the cat's fur. It was warm, impossibly warm, like a flickering ember in the cold night. The church doors creaked open behind them, and Eli turned to see little Emma standing there, her candle still in hand. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but she didn't look afraid. Instead, she looked at the cat with a quiet awe. "I felt it," she said softly. "I felt the bad thing go away." Eli nodded, unable to find the words to explain what had happened. Emma stepped forward, kneeling beside him to stroke the cat's back. The animal purred, its warmth spreading through her small hand. "Is it an angel?" she asked, looking up at Eli. He hesitated, glancing back at the cat. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever it is, it's a gift, a miracle." The bell stopped tolling then, its final chime fading into the stillness of the night. The three of them, Eli, Emma, and the cat, sat together in the snow, the glow of the church's candles casting a golden light over them. The rest of the town never truly understood what had happened that Christmas Eve. When they returned to the church the next morning, they found everything as it had been, the nativity scene undisturbed, the candles still burning, and the black cat sitting quietly by the altar. It stayed with the church from that night on, becoming a quiet guardian of the sacred space. The townsfolk grew to love it, though none truly knew its origins or the full extent of what it had done. But Eli and Emma knew. And every Christmas Eve, as the church bell rang out into the night, they would light a special candle in honor of the cat, their protector, their miracle, their silent hero. The snow continued to fall gently over Willow Creek, blanketing the small town in a pristine, glistening white. By Christmas morning, the events of the previous night had settled like an untold secret shared only by those who had witnessed it. The old St. Augustine Church stood quietly in the heart of the town, its bell tower no longer tolling but radiating a serene sense of peace. The black cat had taken its place by the altar, where it often sat in the days and nights that followed. It became a fixture of the church, a quiet, watchful guardian that the townsfolk grew to love. Children would pet it as they passed, whispering their secrets to it, as if it held the wisdom of the heavens. Adults, too, felt a quiet comfort in its presence, though they didn't fully understand why. For Pastor Eli, life was never quite the same. He would often pause during his sermons, glancing at the cat with a small, grateful smile, as if to acknowledge its unseen vigilance. And every Christmas Eve, he would relight the special candle he and Emma had made in honor of the creature, a flame that symbolized hope, courage, and the enduring power of light over darkness. Emma, too, carried the memory of that night with her as she grew. Though she was young, the lesson stayed with her, that even in the darkest of times, there is always something or someone willing to stand against the shadows. The people of Willow Creek never knew the full extent of what had transpired that silent night. They went about their lives, lighting their candles and singing their carols each Christmas, unaware of the battle that had been fought to protect the heart of their traditions and faith. But the church bell's toll on Christmas Eve seemed to ring a little sweeter, a little stronger, as though it carried the echoes of the miracle that had occurred. The cat, however, knew. It knew that its purpose had been fulfilled, but it stayed nonetheless, watching over the church with unwavering devotion. Whether it was an angel, a protector sent by divine hands, or something beyond human comprehension, no one could say for certain. What they knew was that its presence was a gift, a reminder that miracles don't always come in the form we expect. And so, each Christmas, as the town gathered in the warm glow of the church, they carried with them the quiet assurance that no matter how dark the night, the light would always return. For the true spirit of Christmas, hope, love, and faith, was alive, not just in the candles they lit or the hymns they sang, but in the heart of a small, mysterious cat who had protected them all.